So welcome folks to the final virtual session for the Tree Trooper training. We have a lot to cover tonight, as I said, as folks were entering. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump into it. Let me get this going. Watch, after 4 weeks, I'm gonna be the one with technical difficulties tonight.
Don't jinx it.
Hold on, I'm trying to figure out my screen situation here. Okay, let me present my screen. Okay, folks. So as I said, this is session 5. Tonight, we're really going to be diving into the nuts and bolts of the replant aspects of the Tree Trooper program. We're going to be covering what's coming up for the rest of 2021. We're going to really dive into what the responsibilities of a Tree Trooper is. We're going to work through some tools for you to do some outreach in your community. We're going to talk about what buy-in your community should expect and what you should be expecting to try to get from the community. We're going to go over how to put a project proposal together. We have a Google form that we will walk through. And we're going to discuss WSA site visits, which happen at different intervals throughout the process of your project. We're going to go over some installation logistics. And then finally, we're going to end on maintenance and monitoring. I'm sure folks are going to have a lot of questions as we go through this. But if you could, as in weeks past, just kind of hold off on that, put them into the chat box, and we will moderate that towards the end here. So is this not in? Okay, there we go. So the first thing I want to signpost here is that our final session, our in-person session, is going to be on May 15th, which is a Saturday. It'll go from 9:30 to about 1:30, and it'll be in the Amberley neighborhood in Annapolis. Great, we'll have an email out here in the next little bit with more details. We'll have our COVID policies out, and we'll make sure that everybody is as safe as we need to be, especially as things are changing in Maryland. From there, you'll have the opportunity from mid-May towards the end of June to work through your outreach, put your draft project proposals together, to basically develop them. And then from between June, or the end of June and the end of July, we will be conducting the initial site visits with WSA to help you finalize your project proposals. Your final project proposal will be due August 9th. So as we're looking at that month, if you want to give yourself more time to kind of finalize that project, and you'll have a better idea of the scope of what that looks like as we go through tonight, it's a good idea to try to get those scheduled with myself or with Ray or another WSA staff member as quickly as you can. From there, between the beginning of August and pretty much to the point where it stops getting hot for the summertime, there's a lot of WSA logistics that go into the whole thing, whether that is lining up contractors or organizing the actual planting events. But we're really aiming to do your tree installations towards the end of September through November. So first, I really just want to highlight what a tree trooper is and what those responsibilities kind of entail. So as folks know, having gone through this training, and you'll complete your training on the 15th, this opens up you and your communities to funding through Replant Anne Arundel. And we'll go through what that looks like tonight. But really what we're hoping to get from you folks is the development of tree planting projects in your communities. That entails community engagement, education, and outreach. You'll really be taking the tools and the knowledge that you've gained from the last few weeks and going into May and really implementing them into your community. As you may have seen in previous presentations leading up to this training, Anne Arundel County has lost quite a bit of canopy coverage since 2013, or due to development. And with that in mind, we're really trying to make the county fall in love with planting trees. So beyond that, a tree trooper also helps either install and or manage their project. So there's going to be a couple installation options that we'll work through tonight. But at the end of the day, you end up being the point person to work with the WSA staff person to get the trees in the ground. And then after your trees are in the ground, we really do ask folks to help us monitor the health of the trees and be a point person for the maintenance of those trees moving forward. So as we get into the outreach and education component to your projects, like I said, you really want to help your community fall in love with trees. And what that really boils down to is really understanding your audience and being able to tailor what you're doing to that audience. And WSA has a suite of outreach materials that we can provide for you, and we'll walk through some of those this evening. Some really general tips on how to reach your audience. You want to figure out how to reach them directly. So that could be in-person meetings if you have an HOA or a congregational board that you need to present to. That could be virtual meetings. It could be door hangers. It could be a lot of different events. And a really interesting thing that works is tying your outreach to an issue they might be facing. If you walk through your neighborhoods or your communities and you realize there's a lot of English ivy, ivy is definitely an opponent to canopy health. If you're at a marina and you see that there are a lot of dead trees there that might, that branches or the trees themselves might fall into boats or trucks, there's ways into different communities if you can tie it to an issue. You don't really want to overwhelm folks with a lot of information, but you do want to kind of present yourselves as the point person for the trees and for the program. And again, this might be a little bit of the cart before the horse, but I'm hoping by the end of tonight, you'll have an opportunity to really kind of understand what that is. And there's, you can really, and these next two really go together. You can try multiple options and events and be creative with them. Building up momentum to try to get your community excited about your tree planting project could take a lot of different facets. So with that in mind, WSA has developed quite a bit of outreach material. And if you've been on the Tree Trooper only page in the last little bit, you'll notice that there's some things up there. We have boilerplate information and communication drafts that you can very easily tailor into emails or into Facebook posts, that sort of thing. And of course, we can help you really kind of dig into that if you need the help. But kind of part and parcel to that is also digital and print material. We have a black and white flyer that can be printed that you can distribute. We have a digital flyer that you can include as an attachment into emails or onto community message boards. And again, I'm going to say this a lot tonight because this is a lot of information, but WSA is here to help and help you navigate. So as you're doing your outreach, the whole point is to try to get some community buy-in. You're really trying to pin folks down to getting trees into the ground. And typically, what we ask for is a copay. So, you can get people excited to plant trees, but you also want them to try to invest some skin in the game. And we have developed 3 different options for what that looks like. So the first option is a completely volunteer planting project, and we'll go into logistics of that a little bit later tonight. But the copay per tree for that is $20. That covers the tree material itself, deer protection, stakes, and mulch for each tree. The Tree Trooper responsibilities in this situation is to help develop the project, engage the community, basically identify folks who want to plant trees, and then help us coordinate those trees installations. So in this situation, the Tree Trooper would actually help manage the actual planting event itself. Tied to this is also site preparation. So if you think about sites that might have invasive vines or other invasives that need to be cleared out, that's all part of your project at that point. That point, though, is actually pretty standard across the board. You have to keep in mind that the replant annual funding that we have secured does not cover site preparation. We can't have a contractor go out and do that. Now, if your community wanted to pay for that, that's a conversation. That's something we can talk about. Just keep in mind that each site and each project is going to be very site specific, very Tree Trooper specific. In the volunteer planted option, you'll be digging the holes, you'll be doing the planting, the mulching, all of the installation stuff. There's an additional option to option 1 where you can add $10 to that. So that comes out to a cost of $30 a tree. And in that situation, we coordinate with a contractor to actually come out and dig the holes with you or for you for an auger. This is a really great situation if you have, say, at the school, you want to just really show the kids how to plant a tree, but you're not confident that a bunch of third graders can actually dig the holes for you. This might be a great option in a community that might be a little bit older. It really starts to reduce a lot of the physical parts of the work. The third option is a $40 copay per tree. This covers everything we've talked about, the tree material, the deer protection, all of that material. The tree trooper is still developing the project, is still engaging the community, and still helping us coordinate the installation. And they're still doing the site preparation, but the contractor takes care of everything else. So one key component to the program is that we're asking folks to plant at least 20 trees. So that translates, if you're doing option 1, to about a $400 ticket. For option 2, that would be $600, and then for option 3, that would be about $800. I'm trying to do the math on the fly here, so bear with me. Now that might be a little bit hard for some folks to manage. WSA does offer subsidies for folks who need it, and this form will be on the tree trooper only page if it's not there already. There's going to be a component of your tree planting project proposal that will ask if you're thinking about this. And we absolutely take this on a case-by-case basis. Now, you can ask for a fully subsidized project. You can ask for a partially subsidized project. That can absolutely be tailored to your project. And, as you're working with your community, you know what your community is going to need. I just had a thought and it went right out of my head. If I think of it, I'll come back to it. But this is pretty standard. We're really trying to make this as equitable as possible. The thought that I just remembered, and I'll go back to the slide. So really, as you think through the tree stock that we're working with, the trees that we're putting into the ground are going to be at least 6 feet tall. So if you were to go to Homestead or even to Home Depot or Lowe's and pick out a tree like this, the tree would probably be close to $80 to $100 with nursery markup. So you're really getting a really good deal per tree. And this copay will actually go into a funding stream that will actually work for maintenance. So we'll touch on maintenance a little bit later, but all of the money that we get from the copay goes directly into maintaining our projects. So this is a big thing, and this can be intimidating for some properties, but we do ask folks to sign a property owner agreement. There is an example property owner agreement on the Tree Trooper only page right now, but it's basically an agreement between WSA and the property owner that we have the permission to plant the trees on their property and that they're on board for caring for the trees. Again, this is project specific, and what I mean by that is it should be signed by the property owner themselves or someone who can authorize capital improvements on their property. So if it's going into HOA common land, it might be the HOA board president. If it's going into a church, it might be the church's board of trustees chair, something like that. You're really wanting to make sure that you're getting someone to sign off on the property owner agreement that has the authority to do so. In the age of COVID, this was one of the nicer things that came back because this is actually a big streamline of the process. These are all digitally sent through DocuSign. So as you're working through your project and we're developing the property owner agreement, it will actually go out that way. So there's not a lot of back and forth, or you don't need to worry about getting a physical thing in front of people. It's actually a pretty easy process. So I'm just going to walk through some of the basics of the property owner agreement, or the POA here. This is a little hard to read, so don't try to jump into it. I really have this as placeholders so that I can remember pieces here. But like I said, this very same example is actually on the website. But it really spells out at the top who the agreement is in between. So that's WSA and the property owner. It has some of our verbiage here about liability. So this releases yourselves as you're doing the project from any liabilities, and it also protects WSA for the project. And then it also spells out some covenants here. It really spells out that the folks who signed this agreement are agreeing to maintain the project. It's allowing WSA and our folks to be on site at least once a year for the first 3 years to take a look at the trees to make sure that they're healthy. And then that goes for 12 years for a period of every 3 years. So basically for the first 3 years, it's a site visit once a year, and then every 3 years after that for 12 years. And then it also sets up what the payments are going to look like. So whatever your copay is. And then it also, again, in the age of COVID, has a line item here asking that the folks adhere to our COVID policies, whatever they may be at the moment. So that gets signed by me as the restoration coordinator at WSA, and then the property representative, whether that's the property owner or the whoever can make the capital improvements. We attach to that a scope of work, which I'll touch on here in a minute. And we also ask that we attach the site plan. So you're starting to see why developing your site plans are really important, because this really does go into a lot of different aspects of this work. And this is an example as you're working through reading the example POA, what the COVID-19 covenants are at this point. That would be Schedule B if you're taking notes right now. So typically on the scope of work or Schedule A that gets attached, again, it goes over what payment looks like. This spells out paying by check or paying by credit card. I would ask folks as you're looking at this example POA online to just note that if folks are planning on paying by credit card, there is a little bit of an additional fee because of credit card costs. We are a nonprofit, so we're trying to kind of build them in. The math can get a little wonky, so if you have questions about that, just reach out and we'll help you figure out what things need to be. You also have a project description, and this really gets into the nuts and bolts of what's happening on the site, and it spells out the number of trees and their species for the site. It has a line item there about the maintenance description. That will be another attachment on the POA. So everything that the property owner might need, whether that's the site plan, the description of the project, the list of the trees, and then its maintenance are all in one document so that they have one thing that they have to go back and review if they have any questions. That was a lot. I'm sure folks are going to have questions about the POA. Again, it gets tailored to each situation. So if folks run into, we've been dealing with a couple POA questions right now where folks are concerned about the word covenants, or they might be concerned about the time frame. You know, if you end up running into a situation where you have a community member or a board that's concerned about things like that, just reach out to us and we can see how best to adjust and tailor it to your project. So this next piece, again, I don't want folks to freak out, but I'm going to shift to the actual Tree Trooper project proposal. So we have this set up as a Google form, and this will be now living on the Tree Trooper only page, which you can access. But I'm going to work through this and just show you how one of these might be filled out. So when you actually hit the link, you're going to land on a page that looks like this. As you fill it out, so the first thing it asks for is your email address. And this will actually end up being the form for both your draft or final. The great thing about using the Google form is you can fill this out and then you can go back and adjust. So after you work through the draft project proposal, you go to the same link and you can go back and finalize it. And we'll touch on what that looks like a little bit later here. Oh, I just hit next, but I have it in a different tab. Bear with me, folks. So the second page after you hit next, it asks for your Tree Trooper contact information. It's your name, your street address, and your phone number. And then it asks you to put in your project title. So you may remember this from the GIS demonstration I did, was that 2 weeks ago, last week? Time is a flat circle at this point. But basically it's your first initial and your last name and the year. So in this example, it would be J. Clark 2021. It asks you for a brief project narrative. This gives us an idea of what you're aiming to do for your project. In this situation, I'm planting trees at a residence in Millersville, and it will be a way to infill understory canopy trees where larger trees were lost. And then asks you what kind of community you're going to be working on. If you're planning on maybe doing sites of different or multiple types, whether that's an HOA property or residential property, you can click what is most close to what you're trying to do. And then it also asks you for the name of your community. So for example, the community that we're doing the in-person planting session on May 15th is Amberley. So in this situation, Amberley would be filled out here. If you don't have a specific community name, just put NA at that. Okay. So after you hit next from there, it's going to take you to this page. And you'll notice in the middle of this page that there is another link here to another form. So at this point, you're going to be filling in site-specific information. So when you click this link, it's going to take you to this form. Again, it asks you for your email address and it asks you for your project title. The point of that is so that we can tie it all back together to a single form. And after you enter that, this is where you get into your specifics for your actual site. So keep in mind that you're going to be filling out this form for each site that you're planting at. So if you have 2 trees at 10 sites, you'll be filling out this form 10 times. Does that make sense? And what we're trying to capture here is you're thinking about how you're naming your site. So you're going to number them. That's typically the easiest. So site 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you're going to be putting in each individual site's information. From there.
Real quick, do you mind just zooming in a little bit?
I don't know how to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know if I can, because this is it's a Google, it's not a PDF. But
I got you.
But with that being said, folks, this will be on the website and you can tinker with it if you want to. Just kind of walk through and do that. That's not going to hurt anything. So you're filling in the actual site address and information. Then each site is going to have a point of contact. So whether that is the main person who lives there, whether that's the main person at a church or at a school, that's the information you're trying to capture. So you're trying to get their email, you're getting their phone number, and then you're spelling out the total number of trees for that site. When you hit next there, it takes you to the specifics for your planting plan or your planting list. So this list should look really familiar to folks. It basically mirrors and follows our resilient species list. So as you're going down, you're going to just basically fill in a whole number of the trees that you're trying to schedule for your site. So in this situation, I have 1 downy serviceberry and 1 flowering dogwood, but I don't have any Allegheny serviceberry, so I've put a 0 in that field. So as you go through this, for every single one of these, it's going to ask you to at least put a 0 in. And that's a really good way to just make sure as you're going through that you're not forgetting anything. So the other tree that I have put into this site for this example is apparently not on here. A persimmon. So as you fill that all in, you're going to hit next. And what it's going to do then is basically prompt you to say, don't forget to finish the rest of the proposal, okay? So if that was your last site, you can hit submit. And then you can also submit another response here. So if you hit submit another response, so say, like I said, you have 10 different sites, you need to do this for each one. So I just finished site 1, I'll hit submit another response. You put in your email address again. And your project name. And then you start the process over for your new site. So again, you're numbering it again. So I would hit site 2, and then just fill that out as it goes. So once that's done, after you've filled all of that out, your original form is going to be in another tab. So you go back to that. And at this point, it starts asking you some other installation logistic questions. It asks you if you've called Miss Utility. If you have multiple sites at this point, especially for the draft application, for the draft proposal, you don't need to worry about doing that. That's something that you will need to do for your final form, so that at the end of it, you know you're not putting your trees over any utility lines. It does ask if you have called Miss Utility, which date you called. It gives us an idea if it's been marked already, or if we need to wait to schedule site visits. If you notice, or if you get a cleared ticket with Miss Utility, you're going to want to take pictures of where your lines are. So they're going to come out and spray paint where your utilities are. Just taking a very easy photo with your phone will help us kind of remember where things are and just help us verify that we're not planting things where we're not supposed to. It asks you for the method of installation. Again, you have those 3 options. You have volunteer planted, you have contractor holes dug and volunteer planted, or you have contractor planted. I will signpost here that volunteer planted is the preferred method. Again, we're really trying to get folks to be really engaged and excited about planting trees. And because we have a finite amount of resources when it comes to the funding, volunteer planted, of course, helps us get everything to go a little bit farther. Our goal really this year is to plant 5,000 trees. It also asks you the method of maintenance. A lot of folks are probably going to hit volunteer maintained, especially for their draft proposal. But as you're working through, finalizing your proposal, and you want to go back and you've decided that your community probably would be better suited with contractor maintained, you can choose that option as well. We also have a proposed installation date. Say you're traveling in the fall and you really want to aim for a specific date for your actual volunteer planting event, or that for whatever reason, you can put that there and we'll do our best to accommodate that. But I will also signpost that if you decide to go the contractor planted route, we really are kind of tied to the contractor schedule. So we can't really guarantee a specific planting date, but we can always try to work with them to get you what you need in that regard. So the final question on this part of the form is about site preparation. If you have invasives to remove, or if you have other site prep that you need to do, just giving us a brief description. Again, this helps us on the back end understand the logistics of what's going to go into your project. And then as you hit next here, it's going to go to the financing questions. So again, this goes back to the copay, the $20 per volunteer planted tree, the $30 per volunteer planted tree, and the holes being dug by the contractor, or the $40 per contractor planted. And then we ask you for your anticipated tree cost here. So in my example, I had 3 trees being planted by volunteers, so that would be $60. This is the point here where it will ask if you're requesting subsidization for your planting. So if you are, you hit yes. If you're not, you hit no. And then it also asks you what total subsidization you're looking for here. And in this example, I've hit yes, and I've asked for a full subsidy of $60. So as you hit next, then it's going to ask you to upload all of your site maps. So again, in this example, say I had 10, as I mentioned, if we had 10 sites, we would need 10 site maps uploaded at this point. And with that in mind, as you're kind of thinking through how you're labeling things, especially in the form that has for the tree trooper planting site form, it becomes really important that it is apples to apples. So if you label a site 1 on this one, you should have a site 1 on this upload. Does that make sense to everybody? So this was a lot. I will say that you're working through this. You hit submit at the end after everything is kind of uploaded and ready to go. And you're going to get an email. Oops. You'll get an email in your inbox that will have a link to the form, at which point you're going to want to save that email. because once you do that, it'll give you access to this form and allow you to go back and edit it. So the thought being, if that is in your inbox, you're working through the draft, you can go back and finalize it for your final proposal. So keeping all of this in mind as you're working through the timeline. So I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint here one more time here, and I'm going to go back a few slides to our timeline here. So at this point, after May 15th and then through the end of June, you're really working through to get your drafts. You don't have to have all your answers. You don't have to have all of your site information. You don't need to know your specific species at this point, but there's a lot of placeholders here. So if you're working through your draft, you don't know the exact answer, use your best guess. And then as you're working through your site visits between June and July, WSA staff will help you kind of finalize that. So you have all of the information you need so you can go back and go back into your draft form and finalize it. So let me go back to where I was here. All of that being said, because I'm afraid I'm having some glassy eyes on the screen, don't panic, everyone. What we're going to end up doing here in the next couple of weeks before the 15th is actually making a series of videos that will walk you through this entire process. They're going to be bite-sized, they're going to be easy to follow. It'll break up this entire process so that it's easy to follow. They'll be easily labeled. We'll have guides so that you really understand every bit of this process. And as I said before, I'll say it again, WSA is really here to help you. You know, that's the great thing of having someone who's completely dedicated to the replant program. They know the ins and outs and can really help you work through things. Okay. So we've talked about WSA site visits a little bit tonight. And if you think back to the schedule, so you're going to have your initial site visit at some point between June and July. And the whole purpose of that site visit is to really help with projects. It's taking your draft proposal and finalizing it and getting that all set up. There will be another site visit where the restoration technician will actually drop off flags where you're actually going to be able to flag out all of your trees. There might be some site visits with the tree trooper and the homeowner. And then there's also, if you're going the contractor planted route, going to be some site visits with the contractors. So again, all of these things will include COVID protocols so that everybody's safe. We'll be sharing a presentation on what our COVID protocols look like for in-person and for the actual day of the event on the website, and we'll let you know when they're available. So next, I'm going to just walk through some installation logistics here. Two things to keep in mind is that each project is different because each tree trooper in each community is different. And I am really, again, wanting to stress that we are going to make sure that we have as many COVID protocols in place to keep people as safe as possible. So as we've kind of touched on earlier, there are three types of installations. There's the completely volunteer installed trees. There's the contractor dug holes with the volunteers installing the trees. Then there's the completely contractor installed trees. So the completely volunteer installed trees has a few responsibilities for the tree trooper. They're calling Miss Utility for each planting site. They're coordinating with WSA to order the appropriate material. So what that really comes down to is making sure that we know what trees you're calling out for each site. And that will help us get things ordered, whether that is the tree itself, deer protection, and their stakes and some mulch. You're responsible for finding volunteers to help plant your trees. That's why your outreach is really important. You're hopefully really engaging communities that are excited about this, that you know there are going to be folks that really want to plant trees. And then, of course, you're helping us manage the installation. So again, that's the site preparation, it's the digging of the holes, it's the actual planting, and then proper mulching. And again, I just want to signpost that the completely volunteer driven route is the preferred one because it is a really good way to really hit some of our goals with outreach, making sure people fall in love with trees, and making sure that our funding goes as far as it can. Just signposting again, WSA will work with you to organize your project. Working as a volunteer-driven situation means that you have additional support and attention, and there's also additional training and materials available. If you're concerned about specifics, just let us know. I know we have a lot of steward and steward candidates going through this, so there are some folks who are seasoned in kind of project management when it comes to doing in-the-ground installations. We may be able to team tree troopers together. You know, there's a lot of support to make sure that you have all the help you need when you're organizing your event. So the second one that we're looking at here is the contractor dug holes in the volunteer installation. You'll notice that most of the tree trooper responsibilities are the same here, but for calling Miss Utility and digging the holes, because the contractor in this situation is actually the person who is going to be breaking ground. It'll be their responsibility to call Miss Utility, but we will also coordinate with them to make sure that we know when that is happening, so that we know where the lines are. Now, as you're developing your project, as you're finalizing it, it's a great idea, if not a requirement, to make sure that you call Miss Utility yourself. So it doesn't hurt for you to call Miss Utility, and it doesn't hurt for the contractor to call Miss Utility separately, but really, ideally, you've called Miss Utility before the end of your finalization of your proposal, so that you know that you're not calling out a tree over utility lines. This is all just added protection for us and for yourselves, so that we're not hitting any lines and everything is above board. And then, of course, finally, the last installation option is a completely contractor planted tree option. And again, the tree trooper is responsible for developing and identifying the project, really getting the community on board, helping us coordinate the installation, whether that's days or making sure that we have access to the site or whatever that looks like, and then making sure that the site's ready. But then the contractor is responsible for all of the material sourcing, the project installation, all of that stuff. So I will say, the cost for our contractor planting is significantly higher than the cost of the volunteer planting. Greg, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the average for a contractor planted tree is about $180 per tree. So, with that, you can put that against about $50 per tree for a volunteer planted tree at real cost. So you're really looking at, you can really start to see how our funding really starts to get eaten up by contractor planted trees. That's why it's really, really important to really try to keep this as volunteer driven as possible. So now we're going to talk about some other parts of the responsibility of a tree trooper, the maintenance and the monitoring. Again, the maintenance plans really try to spell out that the property owner themselves is typically responsible for the upkeep of the trees, but the tree trooper is there to help. They're the folks who have gone through the training. They know what to be looking out for and all of that. And again, each plan is tailored to each site. So different trees might have different requirements or different things to note. And as I said earlier, it's attached to the property owner agreement. So again, once the property owner signs off on the property owner agreement, everything is in one place. It's easy to access. It's all searchable. It's all easy to be printed off, but it's all in one place. And this is just an example of a maintenance plan. Some are prettier, some are different, but this is really set up to be almost like a calendar. I know that Brittany has touched on some other things, and like I said, each site will have a specific thing going for it. But you'll see that a lot of this comes down to watering, especially in the first year as we go into summer. It's really imperative to make sure that we have the appropriate water going on. One thing that I want to signpost between October and December is keeping an eye on deer protection. The deer protection that these trees are going to get is really tied to the deer's breeding season. And at that point in time is when deer start to rub on tree trunks, especially trees that are smaller. So we do try to protect them with that. So sometimes you'll see that a deer has knocked off deer protection, and it's really important just to make sure that that gets put back on. Watering in this situation is pretty much defined as turning a hose onto a trickle and letting it set at each tree for about 20 minutes, which is approximately 5 gallons. Some folks have gotten really creative for sites that do not have hose available, and we can talk about those options. And again, that will be kind of built into each of your maintenance plans. And just keep in mind that watering from our perspective is really needed when there are periods of, a week without an inch of rain. If we're looking at that, if we're looking at a pretty wet fall, everything needs to be adjusted. So that will all be built into your maintenance plan as you are moving forward. And then finally, this was another point that I had touched on earlier about the responsibilities of a tree trooper. I just want to really signpost that survivability is very important to the program. The county funding for our program is tied to county stormwater credits. And I don't want to get into too many particulars about that right now, but just know that there's a level of investment riding on making sure that the trees survive. One really exciting thing that's going to be really helpful with monitoring is that we're working with the county to develop a GIS phone app, which will be hopefully rolling out soon, which will allow us, and that's the royal S, that's not just WSA staff, but that's also the tree troopers, to geotag each tree so that we have the location and we know exactly where it's planted so that we can monitor it over time. So as I said earlier, the trees will be checked once a year for the first 3 years, and then they'll be monitored every 3 years after that. That was a lot of information. I'm going to stop presenting, but I am open to questions, and I think Ray and I can both kind of tag team that. Let me stop sharing here. If you guys couldn't tell, this might be a little bit of a shorter evening. But Gray, do you want to go ahead and send them out?
Yes. So first, Carolyn Ricketts, you asked a couple of questions. If you want to unmute and ask your questions.
Yeah, thank you, Gray, because now I even have more questions than when you're emailing back and forth. Because I can see that the first time around when I did this, I hardly knew what I was doing. So, and I've been getting a lot of questions about the planting at the clubhouse from the woman who is going to be putting the notice in our newsletter next month about the tree troopers training, and that they can get some trees for their properties. So just to clarify, I have, as I told you, about 6 people so far, and for each person, I would have to have the property owner agreement and the site map and the details for each and every one, even if it's just one tree, right?
Yes.
Okay, so then I'm going to do like a limit of, for each person, like 3 trees, because I can't manage all these people,
Carolyn, that is a great thought. And I'm hoping everybody kind of keeps that in mind. You really, at the end of the day, we're supposed to be having fun with this tree planting, right? So if you're developing a project that is going to be really intensive across 50 different sites with 1 tree per site, that's going to be a lot to manage, not only for yourself, but also for WSA staff. So Carolyn is absolutely right. If you want to put in some of your minimums, that's absolutely fine. Whatever is going to make it a manageable project for yourself.
Okay, good. Well, yeah, we're on the same page as that. I may make it 5. But I had a lot of neighbors start asking me questions and, can they get involved? And I had asked Gray earlier, and she said, sure, you have to have a minimum of 20. And yeah, I don't want to have 20 different people to deal with. So, or maybe I can do it in groups, a chunk like of 7, 8, 9, for this time, and then another planting thing.
That's another great point, Carolyn. I guess that should have been signposted at the beginning of all of this. But since you guys have gone through this training this year, you will actually be open to the funding as it opens up in coming years. So if you say you do 20 trees this year and you want to do another 20 next year, since you've gone through this training, you have that opportunity.
Okay, that's great, because we also, as I was saying to Gray, we also have what we call the beach property. We have multiple, sites around here that I can work with. Okay, so the lady who does the HOA newsletter was hammering me because she was saying, she's complaining about the website. She was saying it's not updated. they started giving me orders of trees. And I said, no, 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 we'll have a list, correct? We'll have a list that we can pick from and it'll be all native and you can't just start giving me orders of trees. And I said, I think it'll be on the website. Is that correct? What trees will be available? And they were also really questioning me, why do they have to go through a tree trooper? Why can't they just go directly? And I'm like, well, it's a specific program for people who have been trained to be able to take care of the trees. And it's a deep discount that you would not get otherwise, etc. Are we going to have like those parameters on the website so that, you know, other people won't get hammered as I did over these details, which I thought was kind of, you know, a little out of line for her to hammer me. But anyway, I mean, they wanted to know.
So that's the point of going through this training, right? You're the liaison and the face of the program. So you're handling exactly as you should. You're communicating all of that. I will say that the resilient species list itself is on the Tree Trooper only page. So you can share that. That's a shareable link that you can send to folks, especially as you're meeting with the folks in your community who are interested in having the trees. You can share that link and, you know, that becomes their menu. Now, that being said, and something that I really want to stress here, don't make promises about the trees until you've had a tree or a site visit with WSA. Because what happens is we go out and verify that the tree is in the proper place, it's the proper species to use, but it doesn't hurt, especially as you're working through the draft proposal, to think through, okay, I'm not sure exactly what tree I want here, but it's probably going to be an understory tree because it's near a power line, or you know, you can make some moves that way, and then, you know, you don't have to have all the answers, but when WSA comes out, we can help you finalize what that tree stock looks like.
I was thinking too that maybe I could make suggestions to them, you know, this is a shady or very sunny area, or what type of tree, what type of native tree would do best here, because like one of the trees that somebody planted at the clubhouse, they planted a redbud right underneath a big maple. And I told them at the time, this is ridiculous. It's going to grow right into the maple. You have nowhere for it to grow. But so now they're talking about.
That's the whole point of this training, right? You know, working through with Brittany, knowing right tree, right place, taking into site considerations. You know, that's where all of your training comes to bear.
And then my very last question, because I know you have more. You were saying the breakdown of costs, which, you know, the all volunteers 20 and then the 30 and then the 40. I'm just wondering how much it was, because I don't want to chew up a lot of funds for the 30, because I have a lot of seniors in this neighborhood, and above the people who've contacted me so far, I mean, I think all of them are over like 50 or 55, and one of them wears a back brace every day. So it's going to be good if their holes can be already, you know, dug. Yep. So is that, I mean, it's middle of the road, but I hope that doesn't eat into the budget too much.
No. That's actually, the first option and the second option are okay. You know, that adds a little bit more on, but, you know, that's much more manageable than having the actual contractor do the whole thing.
Okay.
That's fine. And again, as you're working through your project, you know, putting that into your project description or whatever really helps us kind of justify that. So that's very helpful to know.
Okay. Okay, cool. Thank you much.
Thank you for your questions, Carolyn. All right, next, Gavin. Gavin, do you want to unmute and ask? I think you have a couple of questions.
Yeah, thanks. So I wanted to know the Google form, is that for each prospective site or a finalized site? You know, I mean, obviously we're starting our conversations now with organizations that we want to partner with. At what point do we fill out that Google form? And if you covered that, I apologize in advance.
That's a great question, and it doesn't hurt to reiterate. So after May 15th, you know, you can start playing around with it. You can take a look at what the requirements are. It'll be up on the site probably tomorrow. But that being said, we're really not expecting you to start getting your drafts in before May 15th. But you do want to have the draft, the draft version of the form in by the end of June, because at the end of June is when your site visits are going to start. So that being said, that's the beauty of this form. You build it as a draft, but then you can go back and finalize. So that will be pretty easy to do. Like I said, you'll get the final, once you submit your final draft, you'll get the email that will allow you to get the link to go back and actually finalize it as your final proposal.
Okay, cool. And then so my other question was, how many projects are tree troopers expected to do per year? What are follow-on responsibilities beyond just the project and its maintenance and so forth? So
Great question. So you're really, we would love everybody to do 20 trees. You're not required to do it. We're not, holding anybody's feet to the fire, but the hope was with you coming into the tree trooper program, you were excited to plant trees, right? So some folks, last year did one project and that was enough for them. Other folks, I think Ann Jackson's on the call tonight, has done multiple projects. So, it really comes down to whatever your capacity is and what you want to do. You could conceivably do a project this year and come back in 3 years and say, hey, I would love to do another project. If the funding's available, we would love to have you. That being said, we do hope that as you're kind of finalizing your project, you're working with folks that you are building a relationship with, because a big component is making sure that they're maintaining the trees. You're not out there doing the maintenance yourself, but you're also, the flip side of that is you're working with the person that has the tree planted to make sure that the trees are being maintained properly, and that either you or another contingent of tree troopers is out there just making sure that the trees are surviving for those first 12 years.
All right, and then next, there were a couple of questions that came in from Lisa Bender. Lisa, if you wanted to unmute.
Okay, I forgot all my questions, but I know I asked a question about, are we restricted to the trees that are on the list? Yes. Or more available? And then where do you buy the trees? Or can you like do a subcategory of them, like a dogwood, but you want a specific dogwood? Or if you're doing a, I don't know, are shrubs available? Like if I was doing a winterberry or a inkberry, whether it's a specific variety of them?
No, Lisa. So the resilient species list is the menu from which you'll be choosing your trees. Okay. Because that's been developed through some pretty rigorous work with quite a few folks to actually get it to where it is. And keep in mind that the resilient species list is a list of trees that have been vetted to really survive in the coming years of changes of precipitation and temperature. So that being said, the idea is we're really working to start to regain some of the canopy in county that was lost. So these guys aren't really, there's some smaller guys that are a little shrubby, but they are really considered trees. There's been some conversation about what coverage looks like when it comes to canopy. And there might be a change in the future where we can incorporate more shrubs. And when that happens, everyone will absolutely be notified of those changes if the palette opens up a little bit more. But really the trees that you're choosing from is from that list. Now, in regards to buying the trees, that all goes through either WSA or through the contractor. And we've vetted local suppliers that draw from our ecoregion, and we really do make sure that they're either in Anne Arundel County, which is a great thing, which there's really not many people who directly work in Anne Arundel County. Some of the contractors, yes, but the suppliers, not so much. But you're really going to be working through with WSA how to do that.
Okay. And then what was, I forgot some of my other ones, Gray.
You were asking about an easement.
I questioned it. It's like thoughts go in my head. There was a lot of them. I did think of whether somebody mentioned about digging the holes for seniors at 50. I'm not tall enough yet, but maybe incorporating the usage of a Boy Scout troop or some kind of scout or an Eagle Scout as into the project. There would be a perfect opportunity for that kind of thing, wouldn't it?
So that's all part of your outreach, right? And that goes into really tailoring that outreach and your project to your community. So if you have groups like that would be interested in helping, we can absolutely work through that to help you get the, you would be bringing on those volunteers and they would be welcome into this.
Okay, I don't think I wrote this one, but now it just occurred to me because I was thinking of all the oaks that were on your list. That when if a homeowner comes in, and says, I want an oak right here, and it's 10 feet from their foundation, all the restrictions that we have to tell them about oaks, we kind of have to find. Is there a list of readily available traits that we can present? Thinking about my own community, which had a lot, I had to argue with them about stuff.
Brazilian species list has spacing requirements and things like that. You would not put an oak tree 10 feet from a building because of its size over time, and that's all part of your training, right? So you're
right.
equipped with some of the tools in the tool belt. If there's site-specific questions, I think it's probably better to handle them on an individual basis. So as you're working with different properties and different questions come up, and especially if there's things that you're not comfortable with, feel free to bring them up, and we can get you the resources you need.
Okay, because as much as I hate to say it, they may believe you where they weren't going to believe me. I would need that professionalism for some people.
Right.
That's why I was thinking if there was something available. Okay, and then I asked something about, I forgot the rest of it. Gray, what else did I ask?
You were asking about easements and who to contact for permission.
Okay, so easements are along a county roadway, or county maintained roadway. I believe it's 15 to 25 feet, something like that. But who do you contact to get permission?
Lisa, you probably will not be planting in an easement. You're going to be working with property owners that you can ensure will maintain the trees over time, and the county would more than likely mow things down as opposed to take care of them.
Because I think somebody from my neighborhood contacted you through Kristen, because she had put some plants against a fence. At one point, this big parcel was all one property and was subdivided. But when I looked on GIS, I could not find any ownership of this one strip. So I'm thinking it was just easements. So I couldn't help her to know who to contact.
So again, in those site-specific situations, and as you're developing your projects, especially if you hit GIS problems or ownership questions, we do have some tricks and tools.
I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
As you're working through your project, that we do, you're developing that. If you run into problems with GIS or whatever, we can help you work through and figure that out. That's the beauty of having a WSA staff member on your team to help you do that.
Okay. I just thought of things that have occurred, so before they occur again. Is there anything else I forgot?
I think that was it.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, and then next, a couple of questions from Bill Mitchell. Bill, if you wanted to unmute.
Hi, I had a couple of questions. Number one was, can we work together as teams? Number two is, I know I've always been accused of thinking outside the box here, but I live in a community with a 350-acre woodland that is neglected. And would it be possible to include the nurturing and monitoring of existing saplings within that woodland to help protect that and to protect them? So, two questions. Is that idea tangible? I know that this program is for something unrelated, or for planting new trees. But if you got an existing sapling that's in danger, would that count? And number two, could we work in teams?
So to answer your first question, yes, you can absolutely work in teams. As I said earlier, we have some really seasoned folks on the program that I'm sure it would be great to team folks up, especially to build some confidence there. And if you're in that boat wanting to team up with someone, just let us know and we'll see if we can get you teamed up with someone. Bill, you mentioned something that is really kind of at the heart of this, is it really is about planting trees, but that doesn't preclude folks, especially people who care about trees and who have gone through the Tree Trooper program, to take on stuff like that. You know, canopy protection, the best tree, it's much better long-term to maintain a tree than it is to plant a tree, right? Like I didn't say that correctly. There's a saying and I can't think of it right now. But as you're looking at your communities and you're seeing ivy issues, as you're seeing problems like that, you know, as a tree trooper, you can take that on. Now that won't count towards the count of your project, but that's not, you know, that's a sister part of all this. Don't be discouraged by that. And keep in mind, you know, that could all be part of your outreach. Say you have a lot of invasive vine issues in your community, you know, you could do a campaign where you're working with ivy removal and then also installing additional trees. You know, that all really works nicely together.
All right, and then next, Allison Milligan. Allison, if you want to unmute.
Yeah, hi. My question was, I just want to be sure that I don't have to be at every place where the plants are going to be planted, because I'm trying to get different communities. And so if I have confidence that I can delegate some of this, and then I can go back later and check. Is that something that's, in other words, does a tree trooper have to be there to plant the tree?
That is a great question, Allison. And so what I will say to that is, and this is very similar to Carolyn's question, as you're developing your projects, you're building into some of these logistical questions, you know, what is my capacity in the situation? In my mind, you know, with previous installations, you know, it would be a neighborhood. So you do a singular installation demonstration of this is how you do it. And then folks will go and disperse and plant their trees. And then you're going behind them and making sure it's done. But typically your installation day would be a singular day where you can do that demonstration and make sure that they get that information well. And then you can go back through and kind of just double check things. Now, if you have multiple sites or multiple communities, that more than likely would probably be multiple days that look like that. So say you have 3 HOAs that you're working with, you would more than likely maybe do 1 HOA in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, and then the 3rd one on another day. Does that make sense? So
Sure.
again, that's a very project specific question. And as you're developing those, that's something that we will help you work through the logistics of that.
Sounds good. Thank you, Josh.
Yep.
And then next, there are a couple of questions from Lynn Michael. Lynn, if you want to unmute.
All right. Let's see. The first thing that occurred to me is, are there any situations in which a permit would be required? For example, if you're within a 100-foot buffer of a river or the bay, whatever. Are there any other situations where you'd need a permit, you or the contractor or the homeowner?
If there is clearance of more than 5,000 square feet, then yes. But again, this is a very project specific question. So that's the other part of working with WSA. We will help you navigate that. If we see a situation where you're reaching the point where you might be getting to a permit, we're more than likely going to be asking you to reconsider. That just adds a whole nother layer to this, and this should be a really easy process. So that's something that we'll take into consideration as we're looking at each project. Okay.
Second thing was, if we're trying to, for the project over at Martin's Cove, plant some trees that are in the common area, the rec area, and then as we discussed when you came out to do the visit. And we're also thinking, we won't know this until we have the meeting with the homeowners the first week in June, but we're also thinking that some homeowners might want a tree for their individual yards. So if we have, let's say 5 homeowners, each of which wants one or 2 or 3, whatever it is, trees, that would be one project plan for each of the homeowners, regardless of the number of trees. Is that right?
Yes.
And then one project plan for the common area. Would that be? Okay. And then the last thing, just dovetailing on what somebody said, if we can't get a Boy Scout troop to help dig, since there are lots of seniors in that community, I presume school groups or grandchildren or whatever might be willing to come out and help. Okay, thanks.
I think folks are beginning to understand, you know, these are very specific projects. And, you know, you guys are really kind of coming out of your communities, knowing your communities. So hopefully you have an understanding of how to kind of tap into those resources. So you're helping WSA leverage those volunteers to make sure that the trees get.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and then next I saw a question come in from Diane. Maybe even two. Diane, if you want to unmute. Oh.
Me?
Oh, yeah.
Right. Is there two Dianes in here?
Yep, it's you.
For who pays for the trees? Can individuals pay? I guess I'm a little confused. I was hoping on my project, it's county floodplain, but I wanted to get families to like adopt their own tree, and each family pays for the tree, and then they plant it, and then they get to babysit it because it's still community property. Can you do that, or does the funding have to be from an HOA or okay?
That's a great question, and I will let Gray kind of get into those logistics because Gray has handled a lot of that. But suffice it to say, if you have, as Lynn was saying, you have a community property that might be planting 10 trees and then 5 homeowners that are planting 2 trees at each, the 5 homeowners would pay for their 2 trees, and then the HOA would pay for the community property. If you wanted to set something up with your HOA where you do have people adopting trees and paying or donating for a tree, that's absolutely accessible or acceptable as well. But Gray, do you want to get into the tracking of that?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, we do have a spreadsheet, just kind of template for tracking your copays, because that's really what that's coming down to, is just who it's coming from, because we do want to know who's participating. But often the easiest thing is to collect all of the checks or Venmo or whatever your preferred method is of collecting the money, and then you can then either create one check or just put all of those checks together in one and mail it to us.
Okay.
But tracking is going to be the biggest thing. So we'll have that template up on the Tree Trooper only page. You can use your own version of tracking, but yeah, it's just going to be about tracking, and there's no limitations of kind of who has to pay for what.
Is there so I've already met with the county and they said we can plant in the floodplain. If individuals pay for it, that's not a conflict of interest or anything? No.
Not that I can think of. And Diane, we can talk about that because your POA is going to look a little different.
Okay.
But really, that shouldn't be a conflict. And Gray bringing up the copay spreadsheet, I just want to signpost again that everything we're talking about tonight is going to have a video attached, kind of walking you through how to do things. So that'll be one resource to kind of review and make sure that you have, so that you can kind of review that. But again, this is so much information. This is the nuts and the bolts of the program. We know that it's a lot. So as you have questions, don't panic. It really is pretty, it's pretty linear. It makes a lot of sense as we get through it. And we got almost 5,000 trees into the ground last year with a group similar to you folks. So we have a lot of confidence in folks.
Awesome. And then next, a few questions from Cindy. Cindy, if you wanted to unmute.
I gotta learn how to unmute. Yeah, so we have 3 tree troopers here in this class, and we all 3 have specific unique abilities. So I'm wondering, this first 20 trees we could do, can we work as a team, whereas we do the whole project together, but somehow divvy up the different responsibilities based on our specialties?
Absolutely. Ann Jackson, who's on the call tonight, had a very similar situation last year, and the 3 troopers in her neighborhood worked together. They did quite a bit more, and Cindy, I would suggest being open to doing more. Many hands make light work, so there's a good chance that as you guys do put your resources together, you'll find that you can get a lot more trees in. 20 is just the minimum, but yeah, that would be ideal. It would be really nice to have a point where we can kind of work through all of that.
All right, and one more question is that so like we did a clean water community, we basically sent out an email to the community and said, hey, whoever wanted to participate, speak up. And that's how we got neighbors to participate. And that's basically how I think we're going to do this. We have a lot of community land too. So my question is that if we have, let's say like 5 residents and they take responsibility for their 5 trees, and then we have 5 trees in the community property, But then we are starting to work with maybe getting a contractor to take over maintenance of the community land. So we would initially take care of it ourselves because we wanted to make sure the first 3 years it's safe. But after that, we can turn the maintenance over to the contractor would be feasible.
So that's a great question. And, you know, I feel like I say this a lot, but, you know, there's a lot of different faces on here tonight, a lot of different projects, a lot of different kind of logistics to work out. And in my mind, that would probably be a situation where we would build into your property owner agreement what that maintenance plan specifically looks like. So say you're taking care of the trees for the first 2 years and then the contractor takes over, there would probably be an expectation that they would follow whatever maintenance plan is spelled out. So that's something that we can work out, and that's definitely an option, but that shouldn't be a limiting factor.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and next, Jim, I saw you had a question come through if you wanted to unmute.
In the past, I had planted trees at a library, and Miss Utility came out and did an excellent job marking out the entire perimeter of the library, except for the spot where we were going to plant trees. So my question is that a logistical problem, or I'm not sure how that works.
That is a great question, Jim. Miss Utility and I have a love-hate relationship, and I think you know that after the last couple of weeks. Typically, when I call Miss Utility these days, I ask them to mark the entire property. I don't try to get into too many logistics. It covers your butt if there's any problems. So if they come back and say that they're all clear for the entire site and you hit one of their lines, that's not on you, that's on them. So as you guys, if you've never called Miss Utility before, it's worth giving me a call. I can walk you through those logistics, but they ask you a series of questions, and specifically like, where are you planning on planting? So I typically just say mark the whole site, and they're pretty good at doing that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and then next, Phyllis, if you wanted to unmute and ask your question.
Yes, so my site has already been visited because it's my capstone project for the Watershed Steward Academy. Do I need to have another site visit for this?
You do, and I'm looking at a few of your other classmates here tonight. And keep in mind that site visit was really to approve your capstone. I'm sorry, folks, this doesn't apply to everybody. But your WSA site visits specific to this program are specific to this program. So they're really to help you finalize your planting palette, your final site selection. So it's another kind of layer to the whole thing. It's really looking at it through the lens of this program. So.
Okay, that's good.
Okay, and next question, Mary Borland. Mary, if you want to unmute.
Can I say one thing? Because I just saw Rich's question and we were just talking about Miss Utility, and this is really, 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 really important. Miss Utility will mark all public utilities. They will not mark private utilities, wells, septic systems, irrigation systems, electrical lines for private lights. So it's really imperative that as you're talking to your site folks, you have that in the back of your mind and you're saying, okay, we're going to call this utility, but is there anything on this site that we need to be aware of? Or, are you on a septic system? That sort of thing. That's something that as we come out for the site visits will help you keep an eye on that, especially as we're doing the initial round during the draft part of all of this. Typically before we go out, we'll actually do a little bit more in depth of a GIS survey. We'll see if they have a septic system, if they're on county water, that sort of thing. Like we'll get an idea of what's going on so that we come armed to look for those things. But Rich, that's a very good point. I'm not surprised you asked that question. Rich also directed folks that if you have questions about your septic and where it might be located, you can contact the health department and see if there's a plan available. If you have questions about that, let us know and we'll get you connected. But I'm sorry, Mary, to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Okay, pretty big. I mean, I guess I'm just, I don't know. I'm a little confused. Like you say it's a copay of $20, $30, or $40. That's the homeowner is going to pay the $20, $30, or $40?
Whoever the property owner is, yep.
Okay, and then that's for a 6-foot tree. That's normally like $80. So you're saying?
Yep.
Okay. Are there any other advantages? Because some people, you know, I don't know. I'm just trying to think of the key ways to sell this to people, you know, besides the price. I mean, you're saying people have to come on their property and check it, you know, different times of the year, and that could be I'm just trying to figure out how to sell that. And
Josh,
yep.
Can I just mention that you could let people know that the Chesapeake Bay received a D+ rating this year. Now we get rated every 2 years. We get a report card, and in 2018, our report card, we got a 33. That's a D+. This year we got a 32, another D+. So a lot of that is because of stormwater pollution, and a lot of that is because we've lost canopy. And so the Chesapeake Bay is really suffering. So that's what the Watershed Stewards Academy, what we all, have nightmares about, right? Is we can't swim in the river smells, it's unhealthy, the crabs are dying, people can't work on the river, they can't play on the river, they can't swim in the river, there's no birds in the water, food, etc. So that's another way to encourage people. And shade,
yeah.
With all the shade and the energy savings that they're going to be receiving when they plant a canopy tree. And even if it's not shading their home, if they're shading some impervious surface like a road surface, then they're reducing the heat. And so the water that will be running off is not as high a temperature. Okay. Those are just two other things.
And Mary,
I'd like to make a comment too for Mary. This program teaches us how to teach people how to plant properly, because I can't tell you about this mulch volcano thing. I've lost count of how many mulch volcanoes I've seen in trees planted at the wrong height, too deep, and so that their root collar is covered and the trees are now sending out all those shoots along the side. So you have a way to make sure that they're planting the tree, they're getting a healthy tree, a deep discount, and you're showing them the proper way to take care of this tree and monitoring it so it won't die, which, for this price, they're not going to get somewhere else. That was all.
I'm just trying to figure out, the best way to.
Yeah.
So Mary, if the crunchy granola aspect of this might not be enough for folks, thinking through the aesthetics, planting beautiful serviceberry or dogwoods are beautiful in the spring. I'm sure you've seen a lot of them blooming now. There's different aspects of that. And if I think you might be surprised when you start advertising the program, how quickly you get people interested in it. But if you run into a problem where you're not getting a lot of folks, we can absolutely take a look at that. Okay. I'm just noticing the time, folks. Okay. Mary, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I see your secondary question was what happens if a tree dies, right?
Yeah, are these homeowners responsible for the tree not dying, or,
we ask them to sign the POA to maintain, right? But there's acts of God that happen, or there could be any number of reasons why a tree fails. But that's part of the reason why we monitor them. We want to make sure that the tree is surviving, but there's no punitive damage or no punitive action if a tree dies. If we work with a contractor, we do ask them to, what's the word, not insure, but warranty for the first year. WSA and volunteer planted situations can't guarantee that, but that's why it's really important to make sure that they have the best leg up at the beginning, being properly installed, all of that. So we're running out of time here, but I just want to kind of walk through some of these questions. So I'm going to read through these and hopefully hit all of them. Lisa asked, who delivers trees to the site and can you pick them up? That's all part of this. WSA will be ordering them and coordinating with you for your date and then coordinating with the supplier to get the deliveries. You don't have to worry about that. Mary asked about doing planting at County Park that would be implemented by volunteers or nonprofit groups that support the park. That's fine. That's a great community to work with. That's one of the beauties of this program. You can do this on all sorts of community properties. You can do this on private properties. It's really to get trees in the ground. In a situation like that, I think the main takeaway, the main thing to be really focused on in that situation would be making sure that you have buy-in from the person who can allow you to do it. So We've worked with parks in the past. We can work through what that looks like. Again, that'll be a site-specific question. I see that Gavin asked, are there any rules about planting stormwater runoff facilities? For example, the big pit in some locations surrounded by a fence and typically mowed. The short answer is yes. There are absolute upkeep things that go into that. You shouldn't be planting in those, and you're more than likely, if it's a publicly maintained facility, you won't have the authority to do that. But that's, again, a question that we can kind of hit on a case-by-case basis. Lynn asked a similar question to Mary. Coming out of this conversation, I think, you know, we can add a bullet point list of reasons to plant trees as part of our outreach. We can think through that. And quite frankly, I think it would be a really nice homework assignment. That is, if everybody could think through a reason to plant a tree and email us, we'll compile that. I think that would be a really good way to kind of crowdsource this. Let me see here. Lynn also asked if Miss Utility will mark Comcast and Verizon. Yep, those are public utilities. Those will be marked. Oh, Lisa, the iTree site, that's a great resource that we can put up. There's a really good resource out that actually puts in the cost benefit of trees. So yeah, I think we can really compile a nice little selling point for these trees. I think that, did I hit them all, Gray?
Yeah, I think the only other thing that I saw was just that Ann Jackson said she was willing to, you know, answer any questions. As we've mentioned, she's gone through this a good amount. So that's great to pinpoint, you know, always talking to people who have gone through this process is very helpful.
I do have one more quick question.
Go ahead.
And this is another utility question, because I've been having a problem in this neighborhood with BG&E. So I don't know if you guys have noticed how they come along and butcher trees, and the last thing we want is our beautiful trees to be butchered. In fact, they did that with my 2 oak trees, which my oak trees are at least 30 feet from the road, and I was very careful to put it right in the middle of my lot, so away from the house, and they still, I got them, they shaved a quarter of the top of a quarter of my tree is gone. So it's kind of like an L shape on one side. Before I could stop them, no notification, no nothing. So my guess, are we also looking to, when we're doing placement, well, 2 things. One, do we know the easements for each community? Because BG&E was telling me that they have the right to chop down my trees completely, that they have an easement, and that the county restrictions laws have been changed so that they could come out into my property and chop the trees literally down. Is that correct? And 2, are we paying more, you know, a lot of attention to what they're going to do in the future to these trees as they get big? Because the last thing I want is my trees that I planted to be chopped up.
So that's a great question. I will say, I mean, yes, the idea is you're going to be bringing to bear the site selection process from the training to make sure that you're keeping all of that in mind. And as we do our site visits, we'll also be double checking that. I'm not entirely sure about the BGE thing. That's something to look into, but that's definitely something to be concerned about. I know
I've been talking to Matt Johnston about it at the county too. He's supposed to be finding out exactly what the easement laws are, because he was kind of horrified. I have, you know, numerous people in the county and my community are upset with BG&E. So,
not surprising.
Yeah.
Steve Miller, are you still on the call? Steve might not be. I was going to give him an opportunity to talk about. Steve, do you want to say anything about working with HOAs or things to keep in mind when working with an HOA for tree planting? You're muted, Steve.
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier with an HOA. You know, you go through the board, the board's got, you know, all the authorities on where the plants can go. If you're not talking about doing it on the individual private lots. The they've got experience, you know, working with the contractors and other folks that do all kinds of projects. Most of those HOAs now also have forest conservation easements, so they've been familiar with having to control invasive species and stuff. One of the questions I did have though, Josh, in terms of contractor involvement on HOA properties, who ensures that they've got the workman's compensation? Because usually that's one thing the HOAs are concerned about.
Great question, Steve. And this is kind of a good question across the board. Part of our contracting process is to ensure that they are licensed, bonded, and insured. So if the HOA or the property owner needs evidence of that, that's part of our RFP process, our request for proposals. We ask folks to provide that, especially as we contract with them. So we'll have that on file and we can provide that.
And I really apologize if you've already covered this, but those people that do assist in planting the trees, is there a release of liability form? Okay.
Yep, that's all part of that is all part of the POA itself. It releases WSA, but then we also have a day of event release that everyone signs. It's all tied up into our COVID release. So as we work through that, you know, that's another logistic that Ray, I'm hoping you're taking notes. We're gonna need to put that up, but we do have kind of project specific releases that everybody signs. Well, folks, I don't know if I'm going to have a voice tomorrow. I don't know how Brittany did this for 4 weeks. But thank you all for hanging in here towards the end. This has been a lot of information. This is our second go around doing this, so please keep that in mind. But if you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to email us. That's the best way to get those in. I do like the idea, if you think of it, send us some ideas about what are the benefits of trees. You know, that'll be helpful for our outreach, and we can put that together. And then, as I said, Gray will have an email out probably towards the end of next week with some more logistics, and then we'll have the final logistics email out for the in-person session on the 15th, probably a couple days beforehand. There's not going to be a session assessment tonight, so I do just want to signpost, if you haven't done it already, please go to the Tree Trooper only page and make sure you do fill out the assessments for the first 4. That helps us really make sure that you were able to retain everything from Brittany's presentations. But I think with that, we're gonna close up shop here. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.